Alright, the article that I'm going to be talking about is called Assessment Through the Student's Eyes by Stiggins. This article has to do with the student's role of assessment. The topic sentence, if you will, says, rather than sorting students into winners and losers, assessment for learning can put all students on a winning streak. Historically, we know a major role of assessment was to rank students according to their achievement. Some students succeed early and build on winning streaks, while others fail early and often, falling farther behind. However, today's schools are less focused on simply sorting students and more focused on helping all students succeed in meeting standards. So because of this evolving mission, we have to embrace a new vision of assessment that can tap into students' source of confidence, motivation, and learning potential. The first thing we need to do is tune into the emotional dynamics of the assessment experience from the student's point of view. The article talks about two groups of student assessment winners, students on winning streaks, and assessment losers, students on losing streaks. So in order to enable all students to experience those emotional dynamics of winning, we need to transition from the reliance on assessments that verify learning to the use of assessments that support learning, or what the article calls assessments for learning. So if you're following along with the article, you can see that there's a chart called the assessment experience, and the chart is divided in two halves. One side says students on winning streaks, the other students on losing streaks. And this chart compares these two groups of students by how the student feels, what they think, what those feelings and thoughts are likely to become, and what actions can be expected. So you can go ahead and look through that chart on your own. It's pretty interesting and provides a little more in-depth idea of the student's point of view and what you can expect from these two groups. Moving on to the next section, Assessment for Learning. This section emphasizes the use of assessments as a teaching and learning process that enhances student learning. Assessment for learning begins when teachers share achievement targets with students, presenting those expectations in student-friendly language, accompanied by examples of exemplary student work. So they need to see those models of what they're expected to be doing. Frequent self-assessments provide students with continual feedback in amounts that they can manage without becoming overwhelmed. I also mentioned that having students self-assess their work not only allows them to see the mistakes firsthand, but also lifts a bit of the burden that we as teachers would have trying to check every student's work all the time. So when students are self-assessing, they work harder to determine what success looks like, and they use the feedback from each assessment to determine what they are now, where they are now, in relation to where they want to be. So they're going to be scaffolding on their own. When we use assessment for learning, assessment becomes more than a one-time event, but rather becomes a series of interlaced experiences that enhance the learning process by keeping students confident and focused on their progress. So they're always setting their own goals for themselves. The article makes it clear that the goal of assessment for learning is not to eliminate failure, but rather to keep it from becoming chronic and inevitable in the mind of the student. If you go ahead down to the next section, it provides two scenarios. The first one is called Set Students Up for Success, and it provides a scenario for an English class where the teacher sets the students up for success and provides a lot of examples for them so they know where they're going, where they need to be. The second scenario, titled Help Students Turn Failure into Success, talks about a math class where a student was getting those bad grades one after another, and she was ready to give up and just felt that she couldn't connect with math. So the teacher did a worksheet with them and was able to turn that failure into a success. So I would recommend reading those two situations. They're pretty good examples of how to set up your classroom for success and then how to turn it around when it doesn't go the way it needs to be going. And then the last section, Redefining Our Assessment Future. The article ends by providing two important ways that we must adjust our vision of excellence in assessment that will help us balance assessment of and assessment for learning. First, we must expand the criteria by which we evaluate the quality of our assessments at all levels and in all contexts. Meaning, traditionally, we judge quality in terms of validity and reliability in relation to student achievement. However, we must recognize that assessment is far more than the test score's dependability. It must be about the score's effect on the student. We have to begin to evaluate our assessments in terms of both the quality of the evidence they yield and the effect that it has on future learning for the student. And second, we must abandon the limiting belief that adults represent the most important assessment consumers or database decision makers in the school. Students' thoughts and actions regarding assessment results are at least as important as those of adults. The student's emotional reaction will determine what they do in response. Regardless of whether their score is high or low, students respond productively when they say, "I understand," or "I don't understand, but I'm going to keep trying." Assessment for learning is about eliciting that productive response to assessment results from all students every time. And I'm going to wrap it up with some questions that aren't necessarily covered in this article, but they are important to consider, I think. Question number 1. How do we use this approach with students such as those in the ESOL or ESE program when they can obviously see that they have different expectations than other students? So when students know that they are different and they need some help that other students don't, how do we use this approach with those students? Question 2, how do we approach a situation in which a student simply has no desire to excel regardless of whether they're being emotionally motivated? So the whole idea of a winning streak or a losing streak, they don't care. It's just another test. How do we approach that situation and reach out to their emotions? And then question 3, how do we continue to bolster students' confidence and motivation with assessments such as the FCAT, in which they don't directly see the results? A lot of what this assessment for learning is about is students looking at their results, seeing how they're doing, and understanding how they can do better. So how do we bolster that confidence when they're not necessarily seeing those results, or the results aren't coming in until halfway through the summer? And that's all I have for you. Thanks for watching.